My guest today is Hayden Clarkin, otherwise known as the Transit Guy on Substack. Well, Hayden, it's great to have you on today.
Thanks for having me, Michael. I'm really happy to be here. It's a beautiful Friday afternoon.
Yeah. And, overall, kind of the goal of the podcast is to talk about, your journey and overall the kind of journey that all of us creatives take in finding a way to build our lives. So why don't you walk through, your Substack, what it is, and really how you got started with it?
Yeah, so the Transit Guy Substack, well, I guess the Substack is the Transit Guy. The Transit Guy Substack started at the end of last year because a lot of people thought that the best way for me to expand my reach in a time where social media was getting super toxic,
Hmm.
especially Twitter, was like, well, maybe you should do video. But video doesn't really work for me as a medium, as a creative process. I really can't get behind video. Um, and I decided I'd like to keep doing writing, and so the Substack started. The Transit Guy Substack started. It had just started post election, and so I kind
Yeah.
of had done a deep dive as to what Democrats and um, blue governance needed to look like, and so that kind of like started and popped off a little bit, and then just kind of posted about what I want to with respect to urbanism, cities, transit, just kind of fun transit, you know, uh, articles that aren't always like ever going to happen or be feasible or pragmatic, but just kind of fun ones about, can you take a train from Miami to Moscow or Miami to Paris? Like, what would that look like? And all of the work that would need to happen. And, mixing it in with kind of like the more fun technical slogs of pieces kind of help pepper it and make it a little bit more tolerable for people who might not want to be interested in reading all of that.
Yeah, and it's an extension of your professional career, correct?
Yeah, so I'm a plangineer. It's an
Hmm.
annoying word, but a urban planner and a civil engineer. I started as a civil engineer. I'm trained as a civil engineer,
Hmm.
and then I started doing planning once the plangineering kind of started becoming a thing as a junior level engineer. And so I was doing half of my projects as planning, half of my projects as engineering, and then when I was kind of going between firms, they're like, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I was like, "I kind of still want to do both of these things," and so I kept doing that, and I kind of got my bona fides in both of them. And yes, I think it's really helpful because I think a lot of times engineers don't totally get context around land use and access and things like that. And then vice versa, where sometimes planners don't totally understand the technical things as to why things can't happen. And so I try to provide a 30,000 foot view as to what that looks like and like why we don't have the things we want to. I had started my I don't know what the right word is, social media career. I started my social media career kind of talking to the choir, and I found that that was really boring and
Hmm.
also not very exciting to just talk to a bunch of like transit nerds about transit. And so I had come to the realization that there are millions and millions and millions of transit fans in New York City just because they take the subway, and they don't really care about the subway. They might not want to talk to you about it, but they have a vested interest in it. And my idea and kind of where I've tried to be different in my content is like talking to the person who's tangentially interested in transit and not someone who kind of like lives and breathes it, so that I can hopefully be a source of like, why is it this way? Why is that way this way? Why don't I have this thing? Why does this look like that? And that's kind of where I've tried to find my lane.
Fantastic. And, what would you say where did you start when it came to your interest in transit and urbanism kind of in your life?
Yeah, so I've credited this story a lot, but it really did come from my grandfather, who was a widower. My grandmother his wife had passed. My grandmother had passed when my mother was pregnant with me, and he like really didn't know what to do with like his first grandkid as a
Hmm.
widower. And so he was like, I drive the public transit bus in Rhode Island, so you're gonna sit on the bus, and I'm gonna drive the trolley around, and you're gonna like it. And also, there's this new train station and mall being built, and you're gonna sit and watch the train tracks be built and routed, and you're going to watch this mall be built. And I fell in love with it as a kid. And so I always had this interest in model railroads and trains and building things. And
Hmm.
I think my I think it started to wane a little bit, my love for trains. Not really that I wasn't interested in it. It wasn't just a focus of mine as a kid in rural Connecticut and urban Providence, where I grown up in both of those places. And so when I went to the University of Connecticut, I had come across a professor by the name of Dr. Norman Garrick, who actually, a lot of creatives actually were his advisee. And he, the first day of my transportation engineering class, had put up a video I'll never forget. It was like almost like a drone video of King of Prussia Mall, which is like
Mhm.
one of the biggest malls in suburban, biggest mall in America, or one of them. But it's a huge mall outside of Philadelphia. And he was like, "What is wrong with this image?" And everyone was like, "There's not enough entrances and exits. I don't know if there's enough parking. There doesn't seem like there's very good walking paths." And he
Mhm.
just like exasperatedly was like, "There's too much parking. It is crazy." And like, I was very lucky to have a transportation engineer professor who was like all about the built environment and like moving people and not cars. And so I just found my lane. And then he was like, "I can't really help you with transit in the University of Connecticut. We don't really have it." And so I decided to double major in German so that I could live in Germany for a year under like UConn's, academic like rigor to live in Germany. And I studied at the University of Stuttgart.
Mhm.
I studied public transportation operation and urban planning. I didn't get any credits for it. It was just more like you satiate your German degree by
Yeah.
going like, by taking these credits. And then I just rode trains all day. And then I came back to America and been doing it since I got back.
Sounds like a lovely study abroad. What's something from Stuttgart that that you really appreciate outside of transportation?
Oh, that's a really good question. They have lovely museums,
Hmm.
and they also do Oktoberfest, really fun. They have a
Yeah.
great Oktoberfest. It's called Frühlingsfest. It's like
Hmm.
the adjacent to Oktoberfest, and they have a great love of sports. I don't really care for sports, but it was a fun place to like go drink. But like that culture and that camaraderie is
Yeah.
so fun,
Well, the
and
community of
it was a
sports,
really,
the community of
yeah,
sports
for
is
sure,
it's as important as the actual sports, because there's folks who are nerds about all kinds of things. There's folks who are stats nerds about, the different parts of sports. But, the
for sure.
community element is something that I've always enjoyed. When you're out of the house and you're out in the community and everybody's cheering for the local team, it's
Yeah,
just so much fun.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is really fun. And also, like one thing that I always thought was really, really awesome about Stuttgart was that most of the economy is based on like Daimler, which is the owner of Mercedes, and a bunch of
Hmm.
like truck companies, and also Porsche. And there's one more that I can't think of. Um, and they're all in Stuttgart. Like that's like
Hmm.
the economy is cars, and yet they
Yeah.
have an incredible transit system. I mean, I think one of the best transit systems, at least in Europe and probably outside of like China, probably one of the best. It's incredible, and it's really funny because it's this idea that like, oh, like Detroit or Michigan can't have good transit because then like you would
Yeah.
kill
I
its
mean, people,
car
Detroit
production.
Detroit's old name is the Paris of the Midwest. It
Right.
because it has the big avenues and big streets and
Yep.
very grand civic monuments. It definitely there's a lot it still has to grow into after its unfortunate contractions, and I've spent quite a bit of
For
time there
sure.
myself. But yeah, fantastic. And so after your time studying abroad and finishing up your degree, what did the beginnings of your career look like?
Yeah, so I never got to finish, unfortunately, I never got to finish being in Germany. I was supposed to be
Hmm.
there for a little longer, but I got sick. And so they were like, "Well, my parents were like, I'd rather you come back because it's really
Mm.
hard for us to like deal with you like sick in a
Yeah.
hospital in Germany for like
Ow.
2 weeks." So I came back, and then I had to find a job quickly because they're like, "You need to have an internship because you were supposed to have an internship in
Hmm.
Germany." And so I found an internship. Through going to the Congress of Urbanism's event actually in Detroit in
Hmm.
2016. One of the head planner for a city called Central Falls, Rhode Island, which is a very, very small city. It's a city of 1.1 square miles, home to Viola Davis. It is a like it's a majority minority city, and it also is very economically disadvantaged. And they were building at the time an MBTA train station as an infill stop because the Northeast Corridor runs right through the town.
And for
And
the
I had
audience, could
asked,
you just explain what the MBTA is?
oh,
Just
sure.
real
The
quick.
MBTA is the Massachusetts Bay Transit Authority, Transportation Authority. It runs all of the regional rail lines, the subway, and all of the buses within the greater Boston area, but also has like a lot of tendrils out into Rhode Island because Rhode Island is technically within its metro area. So, yeah, they were building a train station. And the cool thing about this train station is one side of the platform was Central Falls, Rhode Island, and the other side of the platform was Pawtucket.
Mm-hmm.
So there were two different municipalities sharing literally a station, and the tracks are actually the border. And so I got to work as a planning intern for the city, and work on that project and to see what the access looks like and what transit-oriented development would look like. And I loved it. I had a great time. And then I graduated. And then I moved to California and I worked on transit projects out there, pretty large transit projects, surrounding BART, surrounding projects up in Seattle, and then and tangentially working on like high-speed rail work.
Yeah, you
So
worked
I was
on
doing that.
you worked on the BART extension phase 2 for San
Yeah.
Jose, correct?
Yep. I worked on that project. So just kind of wearing a bunch of hats. I worked on ferry projects. And so I just like really it's kind of where I've gotten my love and my pen to paper work on transit and a lot of they're very big projects. People will tell you that like if you're on a smaller project versus a big project, like a small project could be 2 years of your life, a big project could be almost half of your career.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially with how we build things now.
Yeah, with things taking as long as they do. But it's great that you've had a variety of, over your career, you've had a variety of experiences that probably gives you a lot of, I guess, sense or wisdom on kind of, strong opinions about, what you think is kind of the better direction of things. And I'm guessing that's, what led to kind of your engagement on social media and then eventually the Substack.
Yeah, so what had happened was during the pandemic or during the beginning of lockdown, all my friends had left. They all worked in tech. And so I was like the only one left because I still had to go to the project office every day. And I just had missed the camaraderie of hanging out with other people and talking to other people. And this like very small sect of people were talking about transit on Twitter and kind of urban planning and whatnot. And so I was like, I think there's a void there. And while transit is currently facing like one of the worst crises it had ever had in its existence, the COVID pandemic, I was like, how can I keep the advocacy alive for it online when I'm like stuck in my room playing the new Animal Crossing game? And so I just started tweeting. Like I turned my personal Twitter account that was like all about like loving Adele, and I like changed it all. Basically, just like reframed it to the Transit Guy. It's the underscore transit underscore guy because the Transit Guy. I don't know who has it, but
Did you end
they've
up
never been active.
Did you end up disappointing any of your former followers that were big Adele fans?
It's funny. There was a good like 3 months where people were like, "This is not Adele?" Question mark. like it was obvious it was not Adele that I was talking about, and they were like, "This is not Adele." And so I think I've kind of like lost those people, or those people just happen to like maybe like trains, or some people now.
Thankfully, you found some overlap between your love of music and your love of transit, especially.
Yeah.
I think your highest performing article is about the Dollywood Railway.
Yeah, I think that's like my second or third. Yeah, it's wild. But yeah, so then I had 3,000 followers at the time. It was nothing. And then I basically was confronted by the industry, and not to get too specific, but basically I was told, hey, so this Transit Guy thing is kind of getting big. And at the time it was only like under 10,000 followers. It wasn't that many. And it was only that platform. And they were like, hey, I think you're kind of getting a little too big. So like it's either you put this away, even if you're doing it on your own time, or you keep working as a consultant, in your cubicle. And I chose the latter option, which seemed pretty crazy at the time. And I will admit that was pretty nuts. and I needed to make it work. And
Hmm.
so I left California. I went back to be closer to home. I didn't want to be in, like too close to my parents,
Hmm.
but for far enough. So I moved to New York, um, and I worked at a tech company, working as the head of transit for a transit startup.
Hmm.
And so I started like going into like that digital kind of, what does like tech look like when with respect to transit. And so it kind of helped me transition away from that kind of like big complex of consulting complex. Um, and so I'm far removed from it now. I mean, to an extent.
Hmm.
But I also realized that in order to stay as like the transit guy and kind of capitalize on the audience that I was growing, that I did need to like leave. Um, I needed to leave, or as someone said, yeah, you can't play the game anymore that way. And so in order for me to play the game, I kind of had to go my own separate way. And so that's what I've done for the last couple of years is I started my own firm, my own
Hmm.
consulting firm. So I have a bunch of clients now that I work with as like in a contractor per diem retainer roles. And as I also put out my content and explore what the next steps look like for that.
So when you kind of got that conversation, in regards to
Yeah.
your private creative work, and how it was running into kind of headfirst into your career, what was kind of how did you feel about that? Let's dig a little deeper.
Yeah, no, I was devastated. I was
Hmm.
devastated because for me, I, I I didn't realize that a lot of the problems, um, I think the way that I would frame it was I didn't think it would be a problem to be like
Hmm.
so outwardly honest,
Hmm.
but in that consulting industry and just like as general being a consultant, you really have to watch your words. You have to watch
Hmm.
what you say. You have to watch what you tell the client, and that didn't work for the brand that I was creating around the Transit Guy because for me, and I think a lot of people who follow me will tell you is that like I'm a pretty straight shooter. I pretty much tell people exactly the truth. I don't try to spin anything. Um, and that's really hard to do when you work
Yeah.
like with major employers who might have a stake in almost every major transit agency
Hmm.
or whatnot. You really can't talk about transit costs being a problem, right? You
Yeah.
can't talk about the state of transit in America because when you're doing that, you could provide you know issues to your from what their thought
Well, and
process is
there's
basically
political considerations because transit is
correct.
inherently political, and if you're complaining about costs, that might make certain groups, upset, about that. That could affect the
Yeah,
ability to get certain projects approved. So yeah,
yeah,
there's an inherent tension kind of between
right.
being able to speak freely about, how you feel, what you're seeing in the industry, and the role that you were at. And so you ultimately made the choice to kind of
Mhm.
do your own thing. And how would you say you're now, how are those two interacting, kind of your personal consulting and your advocacy here on the Transit Guy?
Yeah, it's a great question. I There are clients who are like, you can tweet about us or
Hmm.
you could say something, and I am very guarded of that. I make sure I don't talk about them, anything
Hmm.
they're working on, anything that they're doing, because for me, my thought process, or at least the compromise to that is any of the issues that I'm dealing with respect to those agencies, that city, that company, I can talk to them directly
Hmm.
and tell them what I think the issue is, and work with them on it versus like talking to them through the ether on social media. Um, and that's kind of worked the best. And I've had a client who was like, "No, please tweet about me. Like tweet about this thing we're working on." And I was like, "No,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just can't. Like it's one of those things where like I've shut that door to like that's never going to be a possibility, unless I become unless I start my own thing fully and I'm like some big firm at some point. Maybe maybe I can revisit the idea of like, yeah, I can do that if clients ask. But right now, when you're still like finding your way through your career and whatnot, no, it's just not something that I
Yeah,
negotiate with.
hopefully in a number of years you get into more of a position like Jarrett Walker's in, with human transit,
Perfect
and
example.
yeah, and you can,
Perfect example.
really start to drive the conversation. But I would say you've built up a significant audience, you've built up a significant following, and at least within the transportation and urbanism folks, that I'm also plugged into, you seem to your voice seems to carry quite a bit of weight these days.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think, yeah, I think that's exactly. I think Jarrett Walker even had actually told me because I had talked to him about this. I'm like, what do I do? Like, am I ever going to get like another job again? Like, do I have to drop everything? I think I might have told him or someone else, but I think it was him. And he was like, yeah, he's like, you just have to get to a point where you're like me, where you can, say what you want. And I
Yeah.
don't think he says anything that's wrong. But again, I know for a fact, Michael, as I'm sitting here today, I know for a fact there are people in consulting firms all across the country
Hmm.
who are bona fide transit fans, love transit nerds, and don't talk about projects that they worked on,
Yeah.
don't talk about the state of transit
Hmm.
online because they know if they do so, they could easily lose their job. I mean, that's not lost on me. And so I take that, that voice very seriously because I understand what other people are going through with their, financial situation or whatnot.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, ultimately, and that applies to almost any form of employment. There's an inherent
Absolutely.
conflict. I've seen other Substacks where people post, at the top of their articles, these are my personal opinions and not the opinions of my employers. And in many cases, that's a requirement from employers if they're aware of your publication to do
Hmm.
that. And so it's an inherent tension with being a creative of any type. That what you do may come in conflict with your work, and the things you do. Would you say you've kind of built, something that you would consider, workable or stable in that way, kind of from that crisis point?
Yeah, definitely. I am definitely like very solid in where I am now. Am I a millionaire? Like without not even close.
Yeah.
Am I like making more than I was making as a consultant? 100%. Not to a level where I'm like doubling it or anything, but I
Hmm.
will say the one thing that I do think is very funny, and this has happened to me multiple times. There are many people who I've worked with who are my superiors
Hmm.
who I have run into at conferences as the transit guy. And the amount of times they've been like, "Oh my God, it's so good to see you," blah, 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 blah. And you're like, did not give me the time of day.
Hmm.
And or B, you thought like there was no other way for me to do anything other than be in that cubicle and get like listen to my marching orders all day.
Yeah.
And so that's been the most, I guess maybe the pettiness of it. That
Well,
has felt the best.
any form of career advancement or a modicum of fame, you start to face those interpersonal, you see those differences in how you were when you were just, an everyday Joe, and then kind of when you have a bit more of a presence, a bit more weight to throw around in the industry. That's definitely, you can see, not just in transportation, but also, in all sorts of industries.
Yeah, and there's no I always because people ask, it's really hard for me to say like here's how to replicate it. It's
Hmm.
it's really it's really hard to do. A lot of times some things that I've thought of that I think would work for a lot of people if they wanted to follow kind of like what I do is to do it anonymously.
Hmm.
Like as like I don't know, just be like the transit blah blah. I don't know, be
Hmm.
another transit guy or be whatever and build up that following. And then when you feel like you're of a place or of a career where like you feel good enough, put your face on it.
Yeah.
Just rebrand
Yeah.
the profile. You've got the audience. I've told that to a few people who were like very like low level entry like engineers who are like, I want to do what you do. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Wait a minute. You gotta like put your own
Yeah.
career first, or you do something in a completely different industry
Hmm.
that has nothing to do with it, and you just talk about transit all day.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that kept myself off of social media for a long time, because I used to work for a transportation startup. These days, I tend to work for more, completely different tech type stuff in addition to the stuff I do for creating my content online. So yeah, being in a different industry, I would say is a way to get around that problem, and being anonymous,
Hmm.
having a handle or having a unique pen name. I mean, even Ben Franklin had a pen name with Poor Richard and some of his other writings. Like, so it is not an unreasonable thing, and it's relatively timeless if you need to protect your career or protect your, kind of
Absolutely.
keep things separate to have a persona or a character that you've created. And we see that a lot
Yeah.
online with social media.
Yeah, and don't turn yourself into a martyr. Like, don't do it. Don't
Yeah.
be like don't try to struggle on purpose. That's like the number one thing. I mean, tomorrow this whole transit guy thing could go away, and
Hmm.
I will go back to my job, right? Like, there's no I'm not like I don't think I'm like bigger than myself in any way, shape, or form. So, yeah, don't be like I can't work doing engineering, like, and I just got the degree because of this. Like,
Yeah.
please don't do that.
And now, a word from our sponsors. Find your rhythm with Drip Ethos. Bold, smooth coffee that keeps you going. Use code DREAM for 10% off, plus free shipping when you spend $50 or more at dripethos.com. Hey pet parents, give your furry best friend real nutrition they'll love with Zeal. Crafted from 96% real meat, ethically sourced, and free from fillers. Whether it's pup or kitty, Zeal helps fuel vitality naturally. Visit zealpetfood.com and use promo code DREAM20 to get 20% off your first order. Hazelwood Soap Company is a family-owned business with over 20 years of experience handcrafting soaps, lotions, and candles in North Carolina. Everything they make is done in small batches using simple quality ingredients, all crafted in-house with care. Get 15% off your order with promo code DREAM2025. This offer is valid until Christmas Day 2025. Visit hazelwoodsoapcompany.com today. Elevate your everyday with Bonheur Jewelry. Timeless, modern pieces designed in New York City. Right now, get 30% off your order with promo code DREAM30. Treat yourself or someone special this holiday season at BONHEUR jewelry.com. If you'd like to support this podcast, please consider making a purchase from today's ads. You can find all the details in this episode's show notes and at millennialdream.substack.com/sponsors. You can also subscribe to the podcast to support us directly at millennialdream.substack.com/subscribe. Thank you so much for your support. So, let's jump into some of your work that you've done. So what would you say is, some of the articles, because there's articles that are popular, but what are some of the articles or posts that you've done that you really feel, proud about, or you feel like, took a significant amount of time, energy, and effort to put together?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that has really been a struggle for me, and I don't know if this is a struggle for other people, is when I had started Substack, I was like, I'm doing it for fun. And then people started paying me for it because I
Mhm.
didn't realize I had that on, I guess, as like a default. And so people started paying me for
They
it. And I was
started
like,
subscribing.
oh no.
Yeah.
I was like, oh no, because now I have to. I was telling my dad, I was like, we have a cruise. We have a 2-week cruise in Italy. I haven't written anything yet. Like, am I going to write it on the ship? Like,
Mhm.
when is this going to come out? Um, I don't know if there's any one that like really speaks to me. I think the one that I think I'm the most proud of. I think it would be the one about the World Cup embarrassing the United States.
Mhm.
That was a piece that I wrote, was out in January, and it said how the 2026 World Cup will embarrass the United States. Because to me, I really, I really wanted to sound the alarm. And this was like a politically agnostic piece. I really wanted to sound the alarm that I thought that that we just were not ready for like I think there's 11 cities, I think maybe 9 or
Mhm.
11 cities that are hosting the World Cup, and digging in deep and looking at all of the proposals for all of the cities and trying to piece them together. I was like, we are not ready, and this isn't going to embarrass us. And that one went off. That was the first one that I did where it went really viral relative to other ones. And then it kind of grew from there quickly. Um, but then I think the other one I would say that I'm really proud of is the how to build an actually great rail system in Delaware.
Mhm.
I wrote this one because for me, the way that I try to post or that try to think of content is, am I trying to say something for a policy, or am I trying to talk about the state of the country and the world, or am I trying to talk about the state of a geography? And I think a state of the geography is really helpful for creative sometimes because you're able to kind of unlock a market or an area that people weren't thinking about. And so for
Mhm.
me, if I can have like transit systems that I can propose with numbers, with data, with cost, with engineering, feasibility in all of these states and all of these provinces and countries, people can look that up when they search me, and they can see that like I've written something about it, and they could either use it as a proposal, they can use it as inspiration, they can use whatnot. And I'm not just talking about the same couple of places. I'm trying to build my audience so that so other people can feel empowered where they live to be like, yeah, no, we should have this transit system, or we should have this thing. And so that one did very well as well. I think it got like 9,000, 10,000 views. And so, yeah, those are the ones that I really enjoy writing, because I like to crayon. I like, which crayon for transit nerds is basically like going on Google Maps and like putting lines on a paper with stations. And I like doing that. And I'm like, well, why wouldn't I do it and also share it? And so that's been really fun. But I appreciate that you like the Dolly Parton one, because that one was a fun one to write.
Yeah, it was interesting to read, and I think also your Disneyland transportation one did really well. Similar theme.
Yeah, the Disney World did really well, because the reason I talk about Disney World all the time, I've been once my entire life, and I would say I like Disney, but like people are like, why do you talk about it so much? Is because the Disney World, the post that I had written, which was my first post on Twitter that like went big, was the one talking about the state of the bus system and transit system in Disney World, and how it was better and bigger than Orlando and most of Florida's transit system combined. And that really started like, oh, there's a voice here that like people are responding to. And so I talk about Disney World a lot, because I think it's like the things that I try to do with content when I talk about Dolly Parton, when I talk about Disney World, is like, what are the things everyone loves? And then like, why do you love those things? And then like, how can I talk about the policies that could be enacted in your neighborhood or city or state from those things that like you love, based on me reverse engineering it.
And I think also your comparison between, how many people ride on the Dollywood train system, so Dolly Parton's theme parks train system, and how that, I think it's over 17 states. It has more passenger service than 17 states do in their entire transit system, which is insane. It's a great statistic
in the world's richest country.
Yes. And so it really shows the power of that type of comparison, that can potentially push policy in different places that feel like, well, we're not going to be outdone by Dolly Parton,
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. Like we were talking about, like, like the We Go Star, which is the rail line that runs from the suburbs of Tennessee, of Nashville into downtown Nashville. I wrote about why it is the worst. I wrote something like, it's the worst rail line, or it's the lowest. Why the lowest performing rail line is no surprise. And I wrote about that piece and why it is so bad. And I talked about why that service is so bad, and I related it to like the principles of actual like good regional rail and why it misses on all of those marks. And thank God it misses on all those marks, because if policymakers think that like this is the way you build rail, no, it's not actually. So I'm glad it didn't work, because if it did work, then we'd be screwed, because we'd have to figure out like the actual sauce to making good transit if that one had worked. And so, yeah, I mentioned, I think it is like something like 70-something% of all the people who ride trains in Tennessee are using the Dollywood Express. Like, it's a crazy fact. And I think that's it. And I will tell like whoever is listening, if you could find those crazy, if you're able to come up with those crazy like thought processes of like, what does Dollywood Express relate to transit, and how can like I make a broader point about it? That's most of the ball game right there, because the prose and the writing, I mean, everyone can do that. I'm not a stellar writer. That's really like where the rubber meets the road, is like, how can you actually write something that people want to click on? And it's things like that where you're like, wait, what are you talking about? Dollywood what? I was just saying this to yesterday on a podcast I was on, that the airport people mover in Atlanta moves 3 times more people than all of MARTA. Yeah. Which is the rail system for the Atlanta Metro. And I'm like, does that not sound crazy? And when you say things like that, people are like, wait, what?
Hmm.
And then the reaction that I got from it yesterday was, oh, I have to write about this.
Yeah.
Because if that's your reaction, then what is
Yes.
the reaction going to be like on Substack?
Are there any, things that you've written that were a little unexpected in how well they resonated with folks?
The one that again, not to bring not to bring up Disney World again, huge Disney World fan here. Haven't been since literally the 2008 financial crisis. But I think the one that I really enjoy that I didn't think would do as well as it did was the I wrote a piece in August called "The Confessions of a Transit Advocate,"
Hmm.
and this was because I was literally on a plane and the plane did not have Wi-Fi; it was not working, and I was watching like "Say Yes to the Dress" or some sort of like movie. I think it's like 31 Dresses, whatever that movie is,
Oh, yeah,
with
yeah.
Kathy Heigl.
Yes.
And I was watching it and I didn't have internet and I was like, dang, I really need to put out a piece. And so I was like, can I put out a piece that is just from like me sitting here with no artifacts, with nothing, with like no data? That's usually how I write my Substacks is I always have one screen
Hmm.
here that like does all the writing and all the prose, and then I have the maps, I have the articles, I have the art, like, I have all of the data and the meat that I could put into it. But I was like, how can I write something that's just of me trying to explain something? And I basically explained about like what I've gotten wrong as a transit advocate and what other transit advocates have gotten wrong, in my opinion. Um, and it did really well. I
Hmm.
didn't think it would do so well. I just thought it was like, oh, maybe it's a filler piece. Like I try not to write those, but I got to put something out. And it got something like 9,000, 10,000 reads. And it was all about misconceptions of what transit advocates think around transit, like, people choosing not to ride transit. And I talk about all the reasons why that's not true, that people don't choose to ride transit, that people don't reject it. They reject the inconvenience of transit in its current state. And I write about how making driving difficult will make people take transit. And I'm like, that's not true. Like, punishing people for not taking transit and making it so hard for them to drive is not actually a very good case. And then also another one, which is one that I could talk about forever, is like, but people who live in the suburbs don't reject urbanity and reject cities, and that's also not true.
Hmm.
A lot of people who are in there are getting priced out of cities, and therefore they have to live where they live. And I don't think we should like punish them as a result of not being able to afford, New York City or Boston or whatnot. And that one did really well because I do think it's good to, as creatives or as whatever we call ourselves, to practice introspection, to be like, hey, this is where I'm wrong, this is where I'm right, because now I can trust Michael. Like Michael is being honest with me, where he's not just keeps going and not taking in that feedback. He's being honest, and we all have made mistakes. And if Hayden made a mistake, I got it. Cool. Now I'm on his train, talking about more trains, right?
Yeah, exactly. I know I've found when it comes to social media, moving away from kind of the more tension filled conversations, it's like, okay, if I'm feeling this passionate about a subject, I should just write about it in an article rather than wasting my breath on someone who's just not even going to care, you know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, are you insinuating that X or Twitter is not the best medium anymore to get
I
your
don't
point
think it,
across?
truth be told, it probably wasn't the best medium to begin with. It
There
just
never
is the
was.
medium that we all worked with. It's what
Yeah,
we were all on.
absolutely.
And so we've found other places to be in the meantime. And I think we're finding other ways to express ourselves, and this being one of them.
Yeah. And I think also like it talks about like you'll always be rewarded for authenticity,
Hmm.
for good or for bad,
Yeah.
right? You'll always be rewarded for authenticity, and making sure like the reason that I've always said that like people will get mad at me for not posting to the day that I'm supposed to is because I really take a long time on the articles that I write. Like, and I'm not
Hmm.
like, that's not something to like toot my own horn, but like, I genuinely sit down. I make sure all of the alt text works. I make
Yeah.
sure all of the graphics look right. I make sure everything is exactly how I would want it if I were paying for it.
Hmm.
And what am I giving to you that's a source of truth that you can't get elsewhere? Because
Yes.
sometimes I'll read people's pieces and they're just literally recaps of other people's pieces. And so I'm like, but then why am I reading you?
Hmm.
Like, what's your voice?
Yeah.
And I think that's really important is like, you need to have a source of truth that someone can look at and be like, this is a source of truth that I can go away from. Even if it's a simple fact, even if it's a map, if it's a diagram, if it's something.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to I never want you to come to a piece that I'm, writing or whatnot and be like, oh, I didn't learn anything different. You just rehashed everything I knew. That
Yeah.
to me is a failure on my end.
Yeah, definitely. And how do you look to engage with your audience? You do your writings, people comment, people interact, but what are some of the other ways you feel like you try to work with them and engage with them and keep them interested outside of the posts themselves?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I really struggled with this for a long time
Hmm.
and like publicly was disavowed by many people for like basically I was posting a lot about the state of transit, but I was not really giving anybody in the beginning like a call to action. I was just kind of like, yeah, no, things are bad.
Hmm.
Follow me. But I'm not really like, I'm just going to tell you things are bad and like proposals to fix them.
Yeah.
But if you're sitting at home in Minneapolis, I'm not going to connect you to anybody who's that. And it wasn't an implicit, that
Hmm.
wasn't an implicit thing of me being like, oh, I don't care. It
Hmm.
was more just me being like posting and it kind of getting bigger than myself and just keep doing that formula. But I realized there were a lot of transit advocates who are on the ground who are like, hey, I really need the help. Like,
Yeah.
you got me. Like, I agree with you. That tweet you posted that
Hmm.
went super viral, I agree. Now, can you help? Instead of just like collecting followers and moving on. And I was like, whoa. And so that took a minute for me to figure out like how I can like right size that. I think I've done a lot better.
Hmm.
I'm sure there are people who still will always disagree, which is fair, and I can always do better. But now when I do post about something, especially with like a specific like geography, right? Like or a
Hmm.
specific project, I'm always talking to either the advocacy organization that reached out to me, or I'll reach out to them and to be like, hey, can I use this as a call to action? This link, this post, this event, can I try and take whatever traffic I'm going to get and
Hmm.
put it in my second tweet or my second thread so that I can then, like bring people to you. And that's actually worked really well. And that's kind of where I've been trying to, find like a how can we all touch grass. Um, and I think it's worked for the most part, but I always think I could still probably do better with respect to that.
Yeah, getting out in the world. I mean, I even reached out to you initially a few years ago, long before you were writing on your Substack, just to meet up, just from the Twitter conversations we would constantly find ourselves in. I was in New York for a little bit, and you invited me out to a meetup, and that was,
Yeah,
great
that was
community,
fun. We had a
great
great time.
folks. Got to meet other folks that were in town at the time, and some
Yeah,
folks
we
that
had a
have
great
since
time.
moved away. And that's community is important. Getting out there in person is important. Meeting up with people when you travel, if you have the luxury of additional
Yeah,
time while you're in a place,
absolutely.
to meet up with those people that you interact with online in person. As much as we were all taught as kids, never trust, don't take candy from strangers.
Yeah.
I think there's an element of, if you feel you can do it safely, and meet up with folks and make that community, even if it's where you live and where you travel to, I think is incredibly important.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And also I do realize that there are sometimes like there are parasocial relationships that can
Hmm.
come from that where um people expect things from me that I cannot always give them. And
Yeah.
I recognize that. And there are projects and things and politicians that are doing bad things. And
Hmm.
it's hard for me to talk about all of them because then it also like scrambles the brains of the people following me as well to be like, hey, by the way, this I remember I got one maybe a year ago from someone
Hmm.
who was like, there's a bike lane in my neighborhood that some council members trying to take out, and I was like, I know, but I'm dealing with congestion pricing
Hmm.
right now, like, and I'm like, it's hard because I understand that
Yeah.
people feel like the platform that I'm building can empower them, and I want
Hmm.
them to feel empowered, but also at the same time is like I can't be there for everyone at every place, and that
Yeah.
has been hard for me just as a person, especially in the world we live in today, to be like,
Well, and
everything's falling. Like I need to
then
put out another tweet to fix it, and it's like that
the
doesn't work.
inherent nature of policy and making things happen, it's not just all on you, it's not just all on any of us, it's
Yeah,
a group effort. It's on each of
for
us
sure.
to organize, it's on each of us to work together to try to do a lot of things. And there's a lot of things that are going well, there's a lot of things that aren't going well all over the place. And you know it, we can't all attack all the problems at once. And so it's helpful if folks focus on, okay, this is what I can solve, this is what I can do, this is how I can be involved in a way, because ultimately we all have limited time, limited you know availability. We can't attack every problem that we come across. So yeah, it's it's the challenge of being in a position you have to pick and choose.
Yeah, and also just to button this up, one of the things that I'm working on that has taken a little too long for my own personal um, priority is I'm working on a kind of a 101 for people who want to get into the industry
Hmm.
and who are like trying to graduate or in an industry and they think they want to get into transit and urban planning and whatnot, but they're not really sure. And the amount of times I will get a request, a DM or whatever from someone or an email, and they're like, "Hi, I'm just starting out. I'm just about to graduate." I got one today. I was
Hmm.
like, "Hey, I'd love to get into it, but like how did you get into it, and like what books would you recommend?" And that is hard to respond to every single one of them.
Yeah.
And so I think trying to create some sort of resource for a lot of people who might be interested in like how do you get involved in transit or how do you get involved as a job or whatnot,
Hmm.
is something that I'm working on, and trying to be intentional about.
Yeah, and that's ultimately where things like frequently asked questions come from. Literally,
Yeah.
the questions that you receive on a regular basis, and
Yeah.
making sure that people have those resources readily available, especially because you tend to see things repeat. You tend to see things. Now there's unique
Yep.
situations and unique individuals, but at the end of the day, if you have an interest or a space where your followers are aligned, of course you're going to see those repetitions. So yeah, I eagerly look forward to that 101 article if you're working on it, and I know some of your story here will also be helpful to folks.
Yeah. That sounds great.
Yeah, awesome. So, what kind of things do you do, outside of your work, outside of your Substack? What are some of the things that you enjoy, whether it's living in New York or, otherwise, that really, gets your creative juices flowing?
Yeah, great question. One of the things that makes me stay in New York City, because I mean, I
Hmm.
work remotely, so I don't have to be in New York City.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that I'm in New York City is because for me, I find that the energy,
Hmm.
I know that sounds like, oh, the energy, but like the energy of like New York City to me, it inspires me in a way
Hmm.
where I push myself both physically because sometimes I don't want to go out to the club on Friday night. I don't want to go,
Hmm.
but everybody else is going, and so like I feel FOMO for that.
Yeah.
But that kind of energy, and as well as like, hey, do you want to go to the Natural History Museum because they're doing a lecture on dark matter?
Hmm.
That sounds really cool. And so like I've been working on like trying to, go to all the museums. I actually got inspired to write a book that I haven't written yet, but like I inspired to write a book based on a museum exhibit I recently went to. We could talk more about that, but yeah, so it's been kind of like trying to see these cultural institutions,
Hmm.
the food institutions, obviously, and really understand like how a city works. That has been really interesting to me outside of like doing hobbies of like, hey, let's go down to Coney Island and
Hmm.
like let's just people watch and like see how that works and like see
Hmm.
how people interact with like the built environment, how they interact with the beach as also on a city in the fall. Like,
Yeah.
how does that work? To me, that is very interesting. I understand that it would be totally boring for somebody else. But I don't really have like hobbies. I think I need to get one. Now that I think of that, I'm talking about, I think I need to get one. I don't have much free time, but I think I need to get one.
Well, hobbies really come down to, having things that you enjoy doing ultimately,
Mm,
and sometimes it can be something skill based, like your writing, but sometimes it can be something that is, just something you enjoy doing. I mean, bird watching, or like you said, people
I've
watching.
always
Those
wanted
are,
to do that.
yeah, those are great hobbies.
Yeah,
And you
I'd love
said
to.
you're working on a book. Why don't you are free to
I'm thinking
disclose
about
additional
it.
stuff?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess if I say it out loud and someone does the book, then I'll know that they took the book idea from the podcast. I am so there has been talks about a book for a while,
Hmm.
just like full disclosure. Um, but I again in this effort that I have to not write what everyone's already written and to have my own voice, I have no interest in writing a book about cars being bad.
Hmm.
Michael, I have no interest. I have no interest. It's been written 58 times, back and forth, up and down. And to all the people who wrote it, have written it, beautiful books, great books. I'm sure they've helped a ton of people, and I'm glad that you wrote them. It's just not something that I have interest in writing because I already write about it. Um, and I have been thinking about, and there was this exhibit that I went to about the power of place
Hmm.
and how where you live is heavily dependent on how you live. And I always bring up this example that my parents drive to go to the park so that they could go for a walk. They drive to a park to go for a walk. That is the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. But where they live in the area that they live in the suburbs, that's what they have to do to actually like do that walk that they want to do. And where my parents live, for instance, is like think of the most like car centric suburb you could think of. Like they can't even walk across the street to go to the
Yeah.
grocery store. They literally drive from their driveway maybe 800 feet, maybe
Hmm.
to the grocery store because the street is so
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
unwalkable,
You can't
right?
cross it. You can't safely interact with it in any way. It's a place not
And
for people.
totally.
Yeah.
And then when we were in Europe, my dad and my family had the best time in
Hmm.
Barcelona. My dad brings it up all the time about Barcelona, about, oh, God, I'd love to live in Barcelona. And I'm like, those are like where you live now and where someone who lives in Barcelona, they live two totally different lives. And when we were in Europe, our lives were totally different from the minutia of where my parents were living, like where my parents live. And obviously they're different because we're on vacation, but also just like the way we go get coffee,
Hmm.
the way we just walked around the city. Like my parents were exhausted by the end of the day from all the walking. And I was like, but I don't think we did a crazy amount of walking versus what I would normally do in New York. And so there's this idea that I'd like to explore the idea of what it looks like almost in like these topologies or these like vignettes of people all across the world or even all across the country and how their health effects change based on where they live. What it looks like. The specific exhibit I went to was about how seniors live
Hmm.
and how a lot of seniors live in assisted living communities basically because the built environments that they've lived in are so unwalkable that once they can't get a car that they have to like live in this assisted living community just to like eat food because they can't go to groceries all the time because they
Yeah.
don't have a car. So it's like assisted living almost is like supplementing the built environment that they should be having
Hmm.
elsewhere. And so like, what is it like for an 80 something year old who lives in the suburbs who can't drive anymore, but is like of sound mind versus someone who's 80 something years old and in Italy or in Ireland or in Japan, who lives in a small village that's very walkable. What traits and what personalities and what outcomes are different and like health outcomes. And so that's something that I'm exploring. I'm excited to write about it,
Hmm.
but it's also daunting.
Yeah. Well, wishing you the best in luck on that
Thanks. I
endeavor,
appreciate it.
and let me know when the book's out. I'd be happy to read it.
Okay. I'll send you an advance copy. I
Awesome.
promise.
Great. And Hayden, I've really appreciated our conversation today. Thanks for
Thanks for
coming
having me.
on. Yeah, it's been great. And for the audience, why don't you let them know where they can find you online?
You can find me literally at the Transit Guy on all socials, the underscore transit underscore guy on Twitter, and then the Transit Guy Substack. I'm there yelling into the abyss. You will notice, which I think is something that your other guests will say, is that my tone is very different on every social media site that I'm on based on how that social media site works. What I post on Twitter is not what I post on LinkedIn. But yeah, I'm please follow me there. I'd love for you all to read about Dolly Parton in Disney World as someone who's not been to either.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Hayden. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and look forward to your future endeavors.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.